If you still need the world to love you, this will feel like death. Jesus didn't come to give you life, not the life you mean when you say life, not the life your nervous system calls safe, not the life your ego calls successful, not the life your family calls acceptable, not the life your religion calls good, not the life your culture calls normal. Jesus came to kill you. And before you start doing that thing people do, where they turn this into a cute metaphor so they can keep their personality, no. I mean it the way Jesus meant it, not kill your bad habits, not kill your addiction, not kill your depression, not kill your anxiety. Those are symptoms. Jesus came for the root. He came for the thing inside you that keeps begging the world to tell you you're real. He came for the false self, the social self, the performative self, the please clap self, the don't leave me self, the look at me self, the I'm right self, the I'm good self, the I'm special self, the I'm broken self, the I'm the victim self, the I'm the hero self, the entire inner structure that runs on fear. Jesus came for that. And the reason people don't follow Jesus isn't because they don't believe in God. They don't follow because they understand somewhere deep in their gut what he's actually asking. They feel it. Because when Jesus starts getting close, you start losing the thing you've been using to survive. You start losing control. You start losing the mask that got you love. You start losing the mask that got you attention. You start losing the mask that got you safety. You start losing the mask that got you a seat at the table. You start losing the mask that kept you from being seen. And you don't want to lose it because you think the mask is you. You think the performance is you. You think the identity is you. But Jesus is not a self-improvement coach. He's not here to make you a better version of you. He's here to end you, the you you've been defending your whole life. That's why the world murdered him, because the world is built on the false self. The entire world system is built on the same fuel your ego is built on. Insecurity, scarcity, comparison, image, power, status, fear. And Jesus walks into the middle of that system and does the one thing you're never allowed to do. He refuses the game. He refuses the incentives. He refuses the social contract. He refuses the fake life. And when you refuse the game, you expose the game. When you refuse the world, you expose the world. And the world can't tolerate exposure. So it kills the exposer. That's the pattern. It wasn't just religious leaders were mean. No, that's the watered down children's coloring book version. Jesus wasn't murdered because he was polite and spiritual. He was murdered because he was free, because he was operating from a place beyond the world's leverage. They couldn't threaten him into compliance. They couldn't shame him into silence. They couldn't tempt him into compromise. They couldn't flatter him into performance. They couldn't bribe him into partnership. And when someone can't be controlled, the system calls them dangerous. That's why the world killed him. And when you actually follow him, not cosplay him, he comes to kill the part of you that can be controlled. That's the whole thing. Let me say it as clean as possible. The part of you that still needs approval is the part of you the system owns. The part of you that still needs to be right is the part of you the system owns. The part of you that still needs to be seen is the part of you the system owns. The part of you that still needs to win is the part of you the system owns. The part of you that still needs to be a good person is the part of you the system owns. And here's the most offensive one. The part of you that still needs to be a spiritual person is the part of you the system owns. Because spirituality is one of the ego's favorite disguises. You can become a seeker and never die. You can become awake and never die. You can become healed and never die. You can become high vibration and never die. You can become chosen and never die. You can do all of that and stay completely enslaved because the core still hasn't been touched. The false self is still on the throne, and Jesus is not interested in negotiating with your false self. He is not interested in upgrading your prison. He's here to burn it down, not the outside world. You, the inner world, the empire you've been building since you were a kid, because you didn't become the false self by accident. You became it because it worked. It got you love when love felt conditional. It got you belonging when belonging felt threatened. It got you safety when your environment was unsafe. It got you control when you were powerless. It got you identity when you were lost. And that's why it's so hard to die. Because the false self wasn't just sin, it was survival. It was adaptation. It was the psyche trying to keep you intact inside a world that didn't know how to love. So when Jesus comes to kill it, it doesn't feel like repentance. It feels like annihilation. It feels like losing your mind. It feels like the floor falling out. It feels like being exposed. It feels like being humiliated. It feels like being erased. And that's exactly why you resist him. Because you think if the false self dies, you die. But Jesus is basically saying, yeah, exactly. That's the point. Whoever wants to save his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. That's not poetry. That's a literal map. Save equals defend the false self. Lose equals let it die. Find equals the real you is on the other side. But you don't want to lose your life. You want Jesus to decorate it. You want Jesus to bless your plans. You want Jesus to validate your identity. You want Jesus to help you succeed. You want Jesus to make the pain stop. And Jesus is like, no, I am not your mascot. I am not your therapist. I am not your brand. I am not your coping mechanism. I am your death. And if you actually let me do it, I will resurrect you into something the world cannot touch. But you have to die first. That's why the gospel is terrifying. Not because hell is scary, because death is scary. Ego death is scary. Loss of identity is scary. Loss of control is scary. Loss of the narrative is scary. The inability to explain yourself is scary. The inability to perform your way back into safety is scary. And that is exactly what the cross is. The cross is where every coping mechanism fails. The cross is where every identity collapses. The cross is where you can't talk your way out. The cross is where you can't prove you're good. The cross is where you can't fix it. The cross is where you are finally helpless. And that's why Jesus didn't just talk about death. He lived it. He embodied it. He made it the doorway, because the kingdom of God is not an improvement of the old self. It's the birth of a new self. And a birth requires a death. So when you say Jesus came to give you life, you're not wrong. But you're skipping the part that matters. He came to give you life by killing you first. And you can tell who's real and who's fake by how they react to that. The fake ones get offended. The fake ones get defensive. The fake ones start arguing theology. The fake ones start doing that religious gymnastics thing. Well, actually, in the original Greek, shut up. If you need the original Greek to avoid dying, you're not following Jesus. You're using religion to stay alive. And that's what the Pharisees were doing. They were using God talk to avoid God. They were using scripture to avoid truth. They were using morality to avoid death. They were using performance to avoid surrender. And Jesus walks in and exposes it. You clean the outside of the cup. Translation, you're performing. You're curating. You're managing optics. You're building an image. But inside, you're dead. And here's the part most people miss. Jesus wasn't attacking religion. He was attacking the false self, using religion as its hiding place. Because religion, when it's dead, becomes a perfect mask. It gives the ego a moral costume. It gives the false self spiritual vocabulary. It gives the system divine justification. And that's why Jesus is always heretical to dead religion. Because dead religion doesn't want you free. Dead religion wants you managed. Dead religion wants you predictable. Dead religion wants you obedient. Dead religion wants you good. Dead religion wants you safe. Jesus wants you dead. Dead to that entire structure, so you can actually be alive. Now let's get surgical. What does Jesus came to kill you look like in real life? It looks like this. He kills your story. The story you tell yourself about why you are the way you are. Not because the story is all false, but because the story has become your identity. And your identity has become your cage. You're not just someone who had trauma. You're the traumatized one. You're not just someone who struggled. You're the struggler. You're not just someone who got hurt. You're the wounded one. You're not just someone who failed. You're the failure. You're not just someone who succeeded, you're the successful one. Do you see it? Even your pain can become your ego. Even your suffering can become your leverage. Even your healing can become your brand. And Jesus comes in and kills the entire narrative structure. He makes you stop using your past as a throne. He makes you stop using your pain as an excuse. He makes you stop using your identity as a shield. He makes you stop using your self-concept as a weapon. And that feels like dying because you don't know who you are without the story. That's the whole point. Then he kills your relationships, not the people, the attachments, the dependency, the invisible contracts, the I'll be who you want if you don't abandon me contract, the I'll perform and you'll validate me contract, the I'll stay small and you'll keep me safe contract, the I'll be the strong one so no one sees my weakness contract. He kills the entire economy of relational manipulation. And you call it love, but it's not love. It's trade, it's bondage, it's control dressed up as intimacy. And Jesus starts ripping it out. And suddenly the people around you get uncomfortable because you're not feeding the old system anymore. You're not playing your role. You're not being predictable. You're not being who they trained you to be. And then you find out who actually loves you. Because when the false self dies, your social circle rearranges. That's real. Then he kills your beliefs, not your thoughts, your belief attachment, your need to be right, your need to have a stance, your addiction to certainty, your addiction to identity through opinion. That's why people are so political, not because they care, because it gives them an identity. It gives them a tribe, it gives them an enemy, and it gives them righteousness, it gives them a storyline. It makes them feel alive, but it's fake life. It's borrowed life, it's adrenaline. And Jesus kills it. He removes the dopamine you get from hatred. He removes the comfort you get from superiority. He removes the fake meaning you get from being on the right side. And now you're just standing there, naked, without a narrative. That's death. Then he kills your coping, your addiction, your distraction, your numbing, your constant need for input, your constant need for stimulation, your constant need for something to hold you up. And you find out how empty you really are without your addictions. And that emptiness is where most people run. But that emptiness is the doorway. Because the false self cannot survive silence. The false self cannot survive stillness. The false self cannot survive being seen by God. The false self cannot survive the desert. So Jesus leads you into the desert. He did it to himself first. And he does it to you. And this is why people say Jesus gives peace, and then wonder why following him feels like getting ripped apart. Because peace is not comfort. Peace is what remains when the false self stops screaming. Peace is what remains when the nervous system stops negotiating with the world. Peace is what remains when you don't need the world to tell you who you are. That's peace. But to get there, the part of you that needs the world has to die. So yes, Jesus came to give you life, but first he came to kill you. Now let's go deeper. Why would God do it this way? Why not just heal you? Why not just make you better? Because the false self is not a wound. It's a counterfeit life. And God doesn't rehab counterfeits. He destroys them. Because the counterfeit is the barrier between you and reality, between you and God, between you and love, between you and truth. It's not one problem among many. It's the whole problem. The false self is the mechanism of separation. The false self is the thing that keeps you outside of yourself, outside of presence, outside of union, outside of God. And the deeper part, the false self, is the only part of you that the system can predict. That's why the world loves your false self, because it's programmable, it's trainable, it's bribable, it's shameable, it's controllable. The world needs you to stay there, because if you become free, you become ungovernable, not politically, spiritually. You can't be leveraged, you can't be sold to, you can't be manipulated, you can't be hypnotized, you can't be herded, because you don't need anything from them. That's why Jesus is the ultimate threat, because he creates humans who are not owned by fear, and the world can't tolerate that, so the world murdered him. And it will try to murder you too, socially, psychologically, spiritually, whenever you start waking up. Not because you're special, because it's structural. The system has an immune response. It attacks what it can't assimilate. So when you feel resistance inside you and outside you, good. That means something real is happening. Because the false self always fights for its life. It will use anything. It will use religion. It will use morality. It will use therapy language. It will use healing. It will use politics. It will use victimhood. It will use pride. It will use shame. It will use despair. It will even use suicide fantasies. Yes, even suicidal ideation can be the false self's last attempt to control the narrative, because the false self would rather kill the body than surrender the throne. That's why Jesus is so intense about death, because there is a part of you that will never surrender through negotiation. It only surrenders through exposure, through collapse, through being cornered, through being shown it has no power. That's the cross. That's why take up your cross is not inspirational. It's a threat to your identity. It's a declaration of war against your false self. And people don't want that. They want a God who helps them succeed inside the old world. But the true God is not here to help you succeed inside the illusion. He's here to wake you up out of it. And waking up out of it means dying to it. Now, here's where it gets brutally practical. And if you're listening to this and you're nodding your head, but you're still trying to keep one foot in the old world, you're still trying to keep the world's love. You're still trying to keep your image. You're still trying to keep your validation. You're still trying to keep your control. And I'm not saying that to insult you. I'm saying it as a mercy. Because if you actually go into this half-hearted, it will tear you apart. Jesus is not safe for your false self. And he doesn't pretend to be. He literally says things like, deny yourself, lose your life, hate your life in this world. Let the dead bury their dead. That's not motivational speaking. That's a death sentence for the old you. So if you're still shopping for a spirituality that makes you feel good, if you're still trying to use truth to build an identity, if you're still trying to use God to get a better life, then back away. Not because you're rejected, but because you're not ready to die. And if you are ready, if you're at that point where the old life tastes like ash, if you're at that point where success doesn't even feel real, if you're at that point where the world's approval feels like poison, if you're at that point where you can't keep pretending, then you're close. The truth doesn't open to the curious. It opens to the desperate, the people who are done. The people who are sick of themselves, the people who are sick of the performance, the people who are sick of the fear, the people who are sick of trying, the people who are sick of surviving. Those are the ones Jesus can work with, because they have nothing left to defend. And once you have nothing left to defend, you're finally ready to be alive. Now listen carefully. This is not about being a good person. This is not about stopping sin. This is not about fixing your life. This is about the death of the self that lives for the world self, the ego self, the false self. Because the false self is the only thing blocking love. And this is the part that wrecks people. The false self doesn't just block God, it blocks your ability to love other people. Because you can't love someone while you're using them. And the false self uses everyone, even when it's nice, even when it's helpful, even when it's spiritual. Because underneath, it's still trying to extract something. Validation, security, belonging, control, identity. Jesus kills that. So you can actually love, not need, not cling, not manipulate, not trade, love. But to get there, you have to be willing to be nothing. And this is why the message sounds like insanity to the world, because the world runs on becoming something, and Christ runs on becoming nothing. The world says, build yourself. Christ says, lose yourself. The world says, prove yourself. Christ says, die. The world says, be somebody. Christ says, be nothing. And the reason that sounds terrifying is because your entire nervous system is trained to survive through identity. So when Christ starts stripping identity, the body panics. It feels like death, because it is. And here's the last layer, the part nobody wants. When Jesus kills you, He kills your right to interpret reality through your own authority. That's the deepest death, because you don't just lose behavior. You lose your throne. You lose being the judge. You lose being the decider. You lose being God. And that's why the false self fights so hard. Because the false self doesn't just want love. It wants sovereignty. It wants to be the center. It wants to be the author. It wants to be the one who determines what's true. But Jesus is truth, not a teacher of truth. Truth. So when he enters, he doesn't argue with your opinions. He burns them. He doesn't debate your worldview. He exposes it. He doesn't negotiate with your fear. He stares through it. And suddenly you realize your whole life was a negotiation with fear. Your whole life was a management of image. Your whole life was slavery disguised as choice. And then you understand why the world murdered him. Because if a human being wakes up, the whole system is threatened. So the system has to keep you asleep. And it does that through 1,000 leashes: family approval, religious morality, political identity, consumer addiction, career status, sexual validation, social media dopamine, fear of death, fear of humiliation, fear of being alone, fear of not mattering. All leashes. Jesus cuts them. That's why he came, not to improve your life, to destroy the structure that keeps you from life. So let me make this simple and brutal. If you follow Jesus, you will lose your social self. You will lose your image. You will lose your need to be understood. You will lose your need to be liked. You will lose your need to be safe. You will lose your need to be right. You will lose your need to win. You will lose your need to be good. You will lose your need to be spiritual. You will lose your addiction to identity. And the part of you that was built on those things will scream. It will say you're dying. It will say you're going insane. It will say you're losing yourself. Good. That's the point. Because what you call yourself is the prison. And what's on the other side is the real you. The you that doesn't need the world. The you that can sit in silence and not die. The you that can be alone and not collapse. The you that can be hated and still be free. The you that can be misunderstood and still be true. The you that can't be bought. The you that can't be shamed. The you that can't be controlled. That's what Jesus gives. But he gives it by killing you first. So if you're listening and something in you is shaking, good. That means the false self heard this and got nervous. And if you're listening and something in you is relieved, good. That means the real you is tired of the prison. Either way, you're at the doorway. And the doorway is not believing the right thing. The doorway is surrender. Not surrender to the world, surrender to death. Surrender to not being somebody. Surrender to being nothing. Surrender to Christ. And if you do that, you will find out something the world cannot understand. Death is life. The cross is the doorway. The end is the beginning. The hopelessness is the hope. The collapse is the mercy. And the only thing that ever needed to die was the lie you called you. It's time for you to die.